Consider for a moment Wonder Woman, without question the most well-known and popular female superhero ever created, which is impressive considering that her books haven't sold very well in decades and that she's never had a hit movie. In fact, her most noteworthy independent success was a 3-season TV show from the 1970s. Why is that? Well, for starters, she's owned by Warner Brothers, who doesn't know how to market any character who isn't Batman, and DC Comics, who doesn't know how to market to any audience other than 30-year-old men who've already been reading comics their whole lives. But also, comics are weird. And yet, wonderful. And almost no one in comics comes with as much weird yet wonderful baggage as Diana here. In fact, she's one of the only major superheroes who actually got less bizarre as time went on. Wonder Woman was created in 1941 by, believe it or not, a Harvard PhD psychologist named William Moulton Marston. You may have heard of him, as he also invented the polygraph lie detector, a distinction he shared with his wife Elizabeth Holloway. Something else they shared? Olive Byrne. Why, hello, Polly. Have you met my friend Emery? Keep in mind, this was the 1930s. So, yeah, in addition to a father who was 1 part Jung, 1 part Tesla, and 2 parts Hef, Wonder Woman had 2 mommies. In any case, it wasn't just Marston's lifestyle that was highly unconventional, to say nothing of light years ahead of his time. He also espoused theories on gender and feminine psychology that were so radical, Daria would go, damn! He developed said theories in the 1920s when he'd done famous studies on all-female communities. Translation, he observed the rituals and private behaviors of sorority sisters. And yes, that was his job. In short, Marston believed that women were actually the superior human gender, and that the only thing keeping them from dominance was the sheer volume of labor involved in child-rearing and domestic work. Hey, I said he was radical, I didn't say he was entirely enlightened. But because he foresaw the technological advances of the modern age, making that workload much smaller, Marston theorized that within a few short generations, women would use their newfound free time to study, achieve, and take up their rightful place as rulers of the earth, which he felt was for the best. And now you're no longer wondering, how'd he pull that off? He also passionately argued on behalf of comic books as a legitimate literary form, apparently because he wasn't already cool enough. This landed him a job with what would eventually become DC Comics, and when offered the chance to create his own hero, he and the Misses opted to give the world a mythic ideal of the new liberated woman, with Elizabeth inspiring her attitude and Olive inspiring her appearance. The origin story was a doozy. Remember the legend of Hercules conquering the Amazons? Well, in Marston's new version, Herc was a surly macho jerkass who turned the Amazons into, servants. They eventually rebelled and fled to a secret island where they could live as immortals and all men were banned. And to make sure they never forgot why men weren't allowed on the island, they all kept wearing the big-ass bracelets Herc used to keep them chained up. Yeah, that's what's going on there. But then an American fighter pilot crash-landed on the island during World War II and tells them all about these big new bad guys called Nazis, deciding that the Nazis are the new incarnation of the hypermasculine barbarianism they'd always hated, and that, I am not making this up, America, home of Rosie the Riveter and suffrage, is the last great hope for women's equality. I know. They decide to send an Amazon champion to man's world to fight alongside the Allies. The Queen's daughter, Princess Diana, gets the job and a bunch of superpowers, weapons, and vehicles, and ta-da! Wonder Woman. Yeah, now try and tell me there isn't a good movie in that. Marston spent the last 6 years of his life writing the first wave of Wonder Woman stories, all of which used familiar superhero formula to drive home his broader points about female empowerment and the need for women to break the restraints of conventional gender roles. Emphasis on the restraints part. Yeah, so along with the radical feminism and implicit lesbianism, the early Wonder Woman books were also a one-stop clearinghouse for bondage, and even more bondage. Like I said, interesting fellow. As you can imagine, once Marston died and other writers took over, slowly but surely most of that weirdness got drained out of the character, along with the radical philosophy and revolutionary sexual politics she'd been built around, a tradition that continues to this very day, like the recent costume change that made her look less like an Amazonian warrior goddess and more like a recent divorcee borrowing her daughter's clothes to go hit the club. But whatever, I'm sure she's still in there somewhere. There's so much more that can be said on this subject, but I'm about out of time. But if nothing else, I hope you got a new perspective on a character who, like all great women, only gets more interesting the more you find out. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.